Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Investor's Source, your source of all wealth and wisdom. I am honored to have with us today a couple of special guests, Representative Andrew Boesenecker. Did I get that correct?
You sure did. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, that's not an easy last name. And Andy's assistant, Jenna Fisher. So great to have you both with us today. Andrew Boesenecker is a Colorado State Representative in House District 53, Fort Collins. A little bit about his background. I'm going to try to do this from memory. Andrew is originally from Atlanta, Georgia. He came here, I think 10 or 12 years ago or something like that, with his wife. Now they have 3 kids. Andrew is a musician, an ordained minister, and a pastor in Fort Collins. And I know he's on a number of committees in the state house, one of them being related to housing and specifically affordable housing. And the reason I brought Andy on and asked him if he would join us today is that in Colorado and in states around the country, housing and particularly affordable housing is a big issue in government right now, trying to find solutions. And I read recently Andrew's bill, which is House Bill 231190, which addresses the affordable housing crisis, and it really is a crisis here in Colorado. A short synopsis of the bill, and I'll have Andy correct me if I missed anything when I let him speak finally, is the bill is basically it gives local governments the right of first refusal when a real estate investor who owns a multifamily property between 2 and 5 units or more, depending on whether it's rural or in the city. It gives local municipalities the right of first refusal to actually buy them from the seller, therefore creating more opportunities for government to keep those units and rent them out to those who need housing. So it sounds like a great idea. I might have some other thoughts about it as well, but I'm going to stop talking now. And Andy and Jenna, also, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about yourself, how you got involved in housing and how this bill came to you. How'd you got this idea for this bill, and any background you might have in real estate as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I appreciate the opportunity. And so I'm Andy Boesenecker, State Representative for House District 53. So that's West and North Fort Collins, if you're looking at Fort Collins sort of as the circle that it is. And so I serve on a number of committees: transportation, housing, and local government, state civic, veterans and military affairs, legislative audit committee, appropriations committee. And then I'm also a member of our House leadership as one of our 2 House whips on the majority side of things in the State House. And so my intersections with housing really start not long after I was elected in April of 2021. We started working on mobile home park issues in the state of Colorado as a result of some issues that found here in Fort Collins, but certainly not unique to Fort Collins. Inside of House Bill 22-1287, which was a mobile home park bill I passed last year, we established a right of first refusal for the purchase of mobile home parks so that residents could assign their purchase right to a public entity who could then have a right of first refusal on that mobile home park should it come up for sale. As part of those conversations, we not only recognized, as I think folks do across our state, the critical place we are at in terms of affordable housing in the state of Colorado, but also the unique role that public entities, specifically when coupled with all of the federal relief dollars that the state prioritized towards affordable housing, can play in really preserving and creating affordable housing in communities. And so that right of first refusal work, including the constitutional work that we did around that, played a significant and key role in the formulation of House Bill 231190, Affordable Housing Right of First Refusal. And that bill, I will just clarify briefly, it's 3 units and above for rural and rural resort counties in our state, and then 5 units and above for urban counties. And those are categories that were set by House Bill 221304 from last year, where we really looked, and DOLA publishes a list every year of where counties sit inside of those classifications in order to really prioritize affordability requirements. So I'll stop there. And by way of background, yeah, as you said, former Lutheran clergy, former music teacher in a public school, also have worked in nonprofits, and certainly in my work, affordable housing remains a key priority, as I know it does, both for you, Dave, and others in this space. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. Jenna, would you like to add anything about the bill or your background and your background?
Yeah, sure. I've been working for Rep. Boesenecker for the whole time he's been in the legislature, and I've kind of been following along with him as we've worked in the affordable housing space, especially with mobile home parks, where we were aware of the issue from constituents that came to us who are, having issues with their affordable housing and needing to buy their mobile home parks and rent issues.
Cool. Well, why don't you tell us, Andy, first of all, is that bill, it sounds like it just got going maybe in the last year or so. Are you finding it effective, and is it working with mobile home parks?
Yeah, it has been. And so mobile home parks, specifically the Mobile Home Park Oversight Program and then the Mobile Home Park Act, have been really year after year efforts in the state legislature. 1287, my bill from last year, being the latest sort of iteration of work in that space, specifically around the purchase of mobile home parks, increased protections for residents. And then I believe on the Western Slope, I would have to double check on the community in particular, but the right of first refusal has actually recently been utilized. And what we see happening in mobile home parks in particular is that those communities are often most effective and most successful when there is an opportunity to sell, and obviously no seller is under an obligation to do so. If the residents can have an opportunity to purchase inside of that process as well, really taking ownership of the community and the land on which the homes they own already sit. And so that's been a really effective policy. And I think what we see there is when we can create opportunities for a public entity to step into that space. We all know the price of building affordable housing. It can be incredibly cost prohibitive. So I think what you'll see from the state legislature is a multi-pronged approach, not only trying to incentivize the building of more affordable housing, but also preserving it on the back end to make sure we don't lose it just as quickly as we can, put wood together and build it up.
Great. Let's dive right into some of the specifics of 231190.
Great.
And you and I, we may not agree on everything for sure. I'm coming more from an investor point of view, and you have your approach as a representative in Colorado, and I think we're both have the same goal, is to see what we can do to address the issue.
That's right.
One of the things about 1190 is when a seller is selling, the city would first of all be notified. The city would have an obligation to be notified of the sale. Then they would have 2 weeks to actually decide if they wanted to pursue that multifamily property, another 3 months to make their offer, and then another 6 months to actually close the deal. So from an investor perspective, I can tell you right away, the pushback, I think the primary pushback from investors would be, hey, that's more than 9 months potentially to actually close a sale. And what if you have someone who is highly motivated, needs to sell their property quickly for a variety of reasons? How is that fair to the investor to have to, or to the owner to have to wait for up to 9 months to sell their property?
No, it's a great question, Dave, and not one that I take lightly. And so just for context, unfortunately, the way our process works in the state legislature is whatever numbers you put into an introduced bill, you can pretty much count on the final product being south of there. It would be nice if we could just look at a number and all agree up front, right? So the time frame is obviously critical from both a buyer and seller standpoint, and especially for a public entity that may exercise a right of first refusal. So the 14-day time period, I want to be clear as well. This all happens very early in the process so as to not be disruptive. If a deal is, if a transaction is mid-deal, right? The last thing you need is the local government stepping in and saying, oh, by the way, now we want to write a first refusal. So the government has 14 days. The local government has 14 days to say yes or no. If you, as the seller, hear nothing from the local government, the right of first refusal is waived. Local governments can also waive their rights out of hand, so they can disclaim any or all of the rights in the bill, either on a transaction by transaction basis, or they could do so wholesale. So if a city just isn't comfortable engaging in this process, they could let any, through ordinance or otherwise, they could pass something that would disclaim their rights. All of that to say, and then from there, 1287 from last year, House Bill 22-1287, established a lot of the parameters that are in this bill. So it's a 90-day offer period. Actually, it's a 120-day offer period in that bill, and then 180 days to close for mobile home parks. So those are the timeframes that we drew on in terms of precedent. Now, in committee on Tuesday, we amended the bill's timeframes for that offer period to be calendar days and not business days as it was initially drafted. I do anticipate, and we are continuing to work with both our realtor friends, the apartment association, and other stakeholders on that time frame, and remain open to figuring out a time frame that is more workable for folks, even if ultimately we disagree on the premise of the bill. My goal is always to make better policy as a result. On the foreclosure side of things, because you'll note in the bill, there also is a process for if a property is in foreclosure and the property, the right to cure has passed. We amended that time frame for the offer down to 30 days. And so I think there is good conversation happening around this. And I remain committed to being at the table with folks and trying to figure out something that's workable in terms of the time frame for buyers, sellers, and our local governments.
Great. I appreciate the idea of having good conversation around this. Too often we all get so polarized and we have our viewpoint and we can't even talk about it. So thank you for engaging in this conversation. Another point is, and I think a big one, when cities have the right of first refusal, unlike the mobile home bill, which I actually sounds like a good bill to me, which gives ownership possibilities to those living in the mobile home. But in this bill, actually, the city would be taking ownership of the multifamily. Do you really feel it's the place of government or local governments to get into the real estate business, if you will, owning properties, having to manage them? As an investor, I know what it takes to really run an efficient and profitable real estate business. Is that really something the government should be jumping into, or should they just be focused more on helping investors do that?
No, it's a great question. So one thing that's important about the right of first refusal process that's laid out in the bill is we did it to the city or the county for sake of expediency and clarity for the seller. But from there, a local government could assign their right of first refusal to another governmental entity. So for example, the city of Fort Collins could assign their purchase right or the right of first refusal to a housing authority. And housing authorities are uniquely situated to be able to handle a lot of the issues that you raise. In many instances, and the bill clarifies this as well, management is not done by the public entity. It's often done by a private company, a property management company, or some sort of public-private partnership in order to manage those properties. Because as you know, it's one thing to own a building, and it's another thing to do the upkeep and make sure your tenants are safe and happy and all of those things. So I think what we tried to do in the bill is build out capacity for both the purchase process, right? So that for you as a seller, you know who you have to contact, but then from there is is capacity underneath that local government to be able to engage in the transaction. And then certainly on the management and ongoing ownership side of things, the same thing, because there is always that concern of resources, time, and certainly the capacity of a local government to be effective in that space.
Right. And just to push back a little on that is, and maybe I missed it, but it sounds like still the ownership would still be in the hands of government. The management, which I agree with, would go to the professionals like the housing authority, or even hiring people who have expertise in real estate. But it certainly is, it is another ball game actually owning real estate, and again making sure it's a profitable and efficiently run enterprise. You don't want to be draining taxpayer dollars either. So
No, of course. And I think one of the other powerful tools in the bill is actually the waiver process. So if a local government did not feel like they had the resources or capacity to undertake the purchase of a property through a right of first refusal, there's actually a waiver process built into the bill where if buyer and seller, both private parties, can come to the table and understand what the affordability requirements would be, and they can pencil those out, the city can actually waive or the county can actually waive their right of first refusal out of hand, and the transaction can proceed as quickly as both parties can get it done. In Prince George's County, Maryland, where this policy has been in effect for several years, they've preserved about 1,200 units of affordable housing over the last couple of years using this policy. I think somewhere around 80% of which have been utilized through that waiver process, where there actually is no governmental ownership of the building, but both parties can agree to the affordability requirements up front, and it becomes kind of win-win for some of the concerns that you state as well.
well, I love that idea of coming together and figuring out a way to provide that affordable housing without necessarily getting government involved in the actual ownership, which I would be a bit skeptical about, being in the trenches, knowing what it takes. So, I mean, it's great. Again, great to hear that solutions are being worked on and nothing being set in stone that it has to work a certain way.
I think flexibility is the key, honestly, and certainly local control in terms of affordable housing is another key aspect of the bill. So I certainly appreciate your insights and experience in that space as well.
Well, thank you very much. Just yeah, I mean, I think we've spent a good deal of time on that bill, and I just want to ask if there are other bills out there as well in Colorado, and I know around the country, addressing housing, such as rent control is a big one up right now, with a lot of differing opinions on both sides. Maybe you could talk a little bit about if you are familiar with some of those other bills, which I would guess you are, and what are your thoughts on their how they would work to address this situation?
Yeah, I think, well, like you said, I think there are a number of housing bills, and it is honestly refreshing. And I think even if it's contentious sometimes, because we come at the problem from different directions, from, developer to property managers to investors to, part-time legislators like myself. I think it's really important that we have this conversation. The House dedicated in name, and also the Senate as well, housing to one of our committees, transportation, housing, and local government. We need to build up staffing and resources and legislators that are willing to dig into these issues time after time. So recently we've heard, I think it's House Bill 231115, the repeal of the state local prohibition on rent control. That references the Telluride decision. Rent control is not illegal in the state of Colorado. It's just Telluride says that it's a statewide concern. And what this bill would do is say that local governments could actually enact rent control measures. In my mobile home park bill, I had provisions at one point that would have set up statewide lot rent stabilization just for the lot rents of those mobile home parks, because when those increase unpredictably and sometimes even exponentially, it really creates a difficult situation where folks can lose the equity in their home because they can't afford to live on the land that their home sits on anymore. I think there is need for a thoughtful statewide approach on that policy, even if we disagree on the ultimate premise of rent control. One of my concerns, and I voted for 1115. One of my concerns with a localized approach is it becomes a patchwork of different provisions across our state. And then from an equity standpoint, if you believe that policy is beneficial, you might have residents that are left out as a result. You know, certain municipalities or counties might take action, others might not. How would you know, as a resident, know where perhaps from your perspective, you're best protected from rent increases? I think that gets challenging. So, I don't know what the prospects of that bill are. Like I said, I am supportive of those measures, understanding that I think they're stabilizing measures and not increased supply measures. But there is a need, I think, for state resources around that piece if you go down that road. And I think that's something that still needs to be considered. And then recently this week, we also heard just cause for eviction, which is another, again, I think, stabilizing measure for folks instead of, a supply side approach. So those are some tenant rights bills that I think that have come through our way. There's also tax credit bills. We had a great bill in committee last week around habitat homes and what we can do there in order to really build out some of the tax incentives. I think, if I were to emphasize anything, while we might disagree across political spectrum on what the right solution is, I think we would all agree that there is no one solution to this thing, and we need to get at it in some creative ways that really both build housing and hopefully keep people housed in the meantime while we do that.
Amen. I think there are multiple ways to approach the situation. And as you mentioned, we didn't talk too much about the supply side of the issue, which most investors would argue that that's where the emphasis needs to be put to create enough supply to naturally keep prices down. And investors would love to see government's role in that maybe being giving more incentives tax-wise for affordable housing charges, or being willing to provide affordable housing, and maybe to developers some tax incentives for building more affordable housing as a way to again approach it from the supply side. Would love to go on longer with you, and I do want to give you a chance for any final thoughts you might have about how we can further address the affordable housing crisis in Colorado and beyond.
Well, no, thanks, Dave. I really do appreciate the conversation. And if anything, I would say it's just important that we all stay at the table, even when we disagree, because there are creative solutions to be found. There are places where we will naturally be in tension, and there are places where we can work well together. But ultimately, we know it's going to take all of us to get at this thing. I think we owe it to our communities to continue to dig deep on this issue and work hard to provide housing for folks who want to live, work, and honestly play in this beautiful state we call home. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we do have a beautiful state where we have a lot of people who want to live here, and we want to provide housing, but we don't want the state to be overcrowded as either. So appreciate you having the conversation, and you, Jenna, for being here as well. And just keep up the good service you're doing in government, and great to talk to you today.
Thanks, Dave. Likewise. Let's do it again.
Okay, sounds great. See you guys.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.